In addition to the potential new restrictive order we're learning about tonight in the federal criminal case against Donald Trump over the 2020 election, there's a bunch of other stuff happening in the wide world of Trump trials. Today, Fulton County Judge Scott McAfee ordered subpoenas to be sent to 900 prospective jurors for the first trial in DA Fani Willis's RICO case. Jury selection in that trial for Trump lawyers Kenneth Chesbrough and Sidney Powell, that starts on October 23rd. Now, Donald Trump himself is not going to be tried on that date, but he is almost certainly paying close attention to jury selection here. And that is because a criminal trial requires a unanimous verdict from the jury. And all Trump or any of his co-defendants will ultimately need here is one juror to vote not guilty. And even though Fulton County, where the jury pool will be drawn from, is so deep blue that Trump lost to Biden by 47 percentage points, even there is hope for Trump. If you remember last week, upon the release of the report by the special purpose grand jury that recommended indicting Trump in the first place, we got to see the breakdown of how those special grand jurors actually voted. And every time Donald Trump's name was mentioned in that report, there was at least one juror who voted not to indict. Joining me now, I am so honored to announce, are the co-hosts of the Sisters-in-Law podcast, former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, Barb McQuade, former U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama, Joyce Vance, litigator turned journalist, Kimberly Atkins-Storr, and former Department of Justice prosecutor who, of course, worked on Watergate, the great Jill Wine-Banks. The Sisters-in-Law, I feel like a chill running down my spine. It's like historic, all the brain power at this table. Mine is adjacent. Friends, Barb, let me just start with you. The idea that they're going to have to find a jury in this trial on its own is difficult, but multiple juries for the presumed multiple trials we're going to have in Fulton County. How much of an uphill climb is that?
It is an uphill climb, but I think one thing that's important to understand is you don't have to find jurors who've never heard of Donald Trump before, right? That would be impossible. But you do have to find jurors who will agree to decide the case based solely on what they hear in court, not what they've heard in the media or what they've discussed with their friends. And so those will be the kinds of questions they're asking jurors. Not so much what have you heard and what do you know, but can you be fair in this case? And they'll ask a number of questions to delve into that, because I think that that might be the biggest hazard to Jack Smith, frankly, or in Fulton County to Fani Willis, is a holdout juror. The evidence may be strong, but if you have just that one, as you mentioned, that we saw in the grand jury process, that could tank the whole thing. So that's what the government will be looking to avoid. Yeah,
Kimberly, I wonder how you read the special purpose grand jury sort of results, if you will, where there's one no vote every time Trump's name is mentioned, and whether, I mean, legally speaking, is that unusual? And what kind of, how did you interpret that in terms of what lies ahead for jury selection?
Yeah, it's not unusual. And it doesn't indicate necessarily that this is a Trump supporter. Mm-hmm. We've had other cases where there were people on juries that Trump went before who were supporters, but who still found him liable in the case, for example, in the E. Jean Carroll case, still found him liable. So the fact that Fulton County is mostly blue isn't the goal either. Somebody can be a supporter or an opponent of a political character, but still be able to look at the evidence put forward, still know that the prosecutor has the burden of proving it, and still make that determination at the end. I think the biggest thing here is time. Yeah. In Fulton County, Fani Willis has another RICO case, and the jury selection has been going on for months and months and months without anybody being seated yet. If she is going against the clock, that's what I have a big question about, whether she'll be able to even seat a jury before the election, let alone get a trial going.
Right. Well, and multiple potential trials. Jill, I think Judge McAfee has said, we're going to finish jury selection by early November. Does that seem overly ambitious?
Well, with a Speedy Trial Act request, they have to go to trial by the time that was set by the courts, by the law. And so he has said, I'm going to stay here longer than normal hours if I need to, and I'm going to restrict the number of questions you can ask, and that's it. So he is intent on getting the jury seated and sworn before November 4th in order to start the trial.
Well, and I guess to Barb's point, I mean, knowing what the jury's potential biases are, and getting to the bottom of that at the outset seems imperative. So if you're working in an abbreviated fashion, do you worry that there may not be a full plumbing of the depths, as it were?
Yes, but I am one of those people who really believes in the jury system. And I would turn to the Manafort case, where there was a very strong Trump supporter who said after the trial, talking to the press, I believe everything Donald Trump says. But I was sworn as a juror to make my decision based on the evidence I heard in this courtroom, and I voted to convict him on every single count because the evidence showed it.
Yeah.
So I think that people will take seriously their oath. Now, that doesn't mean you aren't going to have some creepy guy or woman who says, I'm going to not vote for conviction of him no matter what, to themselves, but doesn't admit any of the things to the lawyers questioning him. So it is a risk. It's definitely
especially
a risk.
In these polarized times where Donald Trump is such a divisive figure and people's allegiance to him is based in large part on emotion and it's a construct nobody can seem to break. Joyce, there is concern about the jury selection and jury tainting all over the place. And in part of the order that the motion that the special counsel filed that was unsealed in part today, we learned that they're concerned about Donald Trump's defense team polling the jury. I'll read an excerpt. Because of the potential prejudice that jury polling may cause, the government respectfully requests that the court set forth a process to review efforts by either party to engage in contacts with members of the jury venire in this district. I apologize for the Latin, it's just in there. Undertaken for the purpose of discussing case-specific facts, including any pre-trial survey, poll, focus group, or similar study. I read that and I was like, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Poll, survey, focus group with potential jury members. What is that?
Yeah, so jury selection has become a matter of science, or at least of social science. And in these high-value cases, there are companies that will go out and they will poll communities to get a profile of what juries might look like. And it can be a fairly intrusive process if you've got enough funding to do it, right? It might be telephone surveys. There are different ways of doing it. So the judge has done something really smart here. For one thing, she's put this time constraint on it. If you're going to poll, you've got to be done 30 days before trial begins. That gives people time to get a little bit of distance from the experience. But she's also said that they can only use any kind of jury science if she signs off in advance. And I assume that she will have some very strict parameters that she'll impose.
Just to be clear, Barb, the reason they might be focus grouping a jury pool is to make the case that there's no way Trump can get a fair trial in Washington, D.C. Is that sort of the end game here, in theory?
I think that could be part of it. So in a general case, it might just be we want to get a feel for what the people in this community think about this case. We might shape our defense in a certain way depending on the kinds of answers we get from these people. But to your point, I think the concern is they're actually going to taint the jury pool.
Right.
One of the things that's asked for in that request is that there be no suggestion of what the facts are in the case, because you could imagine Donald Trump injecting false facts into the potential jury pool, and they don't remember whether they heard it in court or where they heard it, and they end up acquitting based on some facts that aren't even part of the case. But I also think, to your point, that one of the goals might be to say, look, Judge, we polled this community, and they're all against Donald Trump, so we should change venue from Washington, D.C. to some other community
to West Virginia,
where he's viewed more favorably.
Well, can I just say, it feels more, it's like it's more the latter than the former, because Donald Trump's out there tweeting about Washington, D.C. Full disclosure, my hometown is a 95% anti-Trump, filthy, crime-ridden hole. Yeah. That does not seem to be like someone who's going to spend any capital trying to convince the people, the good men and women and people of Washington, D.C., that Donald Trump is innocent. It sounds like someone who wants to get the hell out of Dodge.
Right. It's somebody who wants to taint the jury pool so that they can say, oh, I can't get a fair trial. I live in Washington, D.C., so I can say not only is that the goal, but the people in Washington, D.C. are also pretty savvy, and they really don't care what Donald Trump may post on social media about them. They have the ability to put things aside. And listen, polling of a jury can try to find out so many things. If you've ever been on a jury, it sometimes doesn't have anything to do with what somebody thinks about them. I've been on a jury once where we reached a unanimous decision except for one who understood that the decision had to go the way that it did, not guilty, but just was like, but I think he did it. But do you think the prosecutor made the case? No. But I think he did. It could be a holdout, can be for any reason. So this is a big case for prosecutors, as you pointed out. They have to shoot and not miss. And so the more information that they can get to prepare, the better. And the more the defense can get in order to prepare their case, the better, too. So it's not necessarily nefarious.
And the prosecution could do this jury polling to find out information. I'd only thought of it sort of asymmetrically as a defense move, Jill.
Absolutely, the prosecution can. And I think that Trump is already trying to taint the jury pool. He has, at least in Mar-a-Lago, said, I will testify that I absolutely did not order any of the surveillance tapes to be destroyed. That's clearly an attempt to get to potential jurors. And so I think, if we go back to the case of having him a gag order, a little teeny bit of a gag order, which I don't think is enough right now. I think there has to be a lot more detail put into it to prevent him from doing that kind of thing.
Yeah, a few more sticks. I think the carrots have not worked.